Good morning, Nathan Mers here. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, the 3.2 Carrera, coming to you from our top secret location at the 3.2 Carrera Ranch. It's as if we stepped back in time. It's 1990, and we have an array today of every possible configuration 3.2, and we've got every model year here today represented. So we're going to talk initially about what changed over the production life from 1984 through 1989 here for U.S. delivered 3.2 Carreras. We won't touch on other markets, but we're going to focus on these.
This video is made possible with help from Leland West, pleasure use insurance for Porsches, endorsed by PCA since 1992.
Our first car up today is a 1984 3.2-liter Carrera in a gorgeous shade called Quartzite. Of course, we know not a lot of aesthetic changes from the 911 SC until the 3.2 Carrera. The single biggest giveaway on these cars is our integrated front fog lights. The previous generation SCs, they hang from the front valence. They become a little bit better in terms of integration into the front valence here. So lots of changes happened over time, mostly engineering style changes. Aesthetically, again, through this entire 5-year production run, they look very, very similar. I'm going to point out some changes. And again, not all of these cars are as delivered. We do have some as delivered examples. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But when we call out a specific feature that's unique to that model year, that'll be a good identifier. So the single biggest external indicator that you have an 84 3.2-liter Carrera is right over here. This, of course, is our external antenna, which the 911 has had since beginning production in 1964. 84 is the last year they had an external antenna. Starting in 85, they were integrated into the windscreen. So if you see no external antenna, you know it's an 84. The other really, really good giveaway is the interior. So the 84 carried over the interior from the 911 SC. So you'll see the 911 SC style seating, the 911 SC style 3-spoke steering wheel, and the small dash vent. So this is indicative of what you would see for an 84. So real quick, we'll jump over to the next car in line, which is the 85. The only external clue that you have an 85, of course, would be the deletion of the external antenna. But your biggest clue is going to be the seats. So starting 85, Porsche introduced a new style seat, which you see here. This style seat carried all the way through the end of 1994 964 production. They did introduce a new style steering wheel. This car has been updated with a Magnus Walker steering wheel, so you won't see that. I'll point that out in the 86. And how you would know this is not an 86, it's got the small AC vents still carried over from the 911 SC. So small vents on the side as well as a smaller center vent. Okay, so this would indicate this being an 85. The other clue, of course, would be the fact it does not yet have a third brake light. Third brake light was introduced in 1986. So we'll jump over to the next car in line, which is our very original 86 3.2 Carrera Coupe. And again, some of your differences you're going to spot right away. The inclusion of the third brake light up here in the windscreen, that indicates, so you can say, okay, it's got a later interior, no antenna, third brake light, must be an 86. And again, one of the biggest changes, they updated the dash. For those of you who live in hotter states, you want an 86 to 89, much better AC flow. Still lousy, so don't expect it's going to blow like your GMC pickup truck. But for a Porsche of this era, that's about as good as it gets. One other thing to point out, we'll head to the front of the car. Through 1986, these cars used what we call the sugar scoop headlight. So this would be the sugar scoop style headlight. This was due to federal law. So federal law said we had to have sealed beam headlights here in the US, a lousy idea. But again, Porsches had these all the way through 86. If you would have had a European market example, we can look at the car, this 85 here has been updated, a very common update, with what are called H4 headlights. The H4 headlight is again what you would have had if you had a rest of world or European market delivered 911 would have these H4s. So one of your big giveaways that you've jumped to 87 aesthetically is what we call the H5 headlight, which is what Porsche did because consumers said, well, we like the look of the H4, but they had to meet US specifications, so they came up with the H5, which is a better looking light, but from a function standpoint, it's absolutely lousy. The H4 is a much, much better lens. Unfortunately, our example 87 is a cabriolet, so I won't be able to show you one unique feature to 87s, but I will call it out. Actually, I can call it out behind us. Here's another 87 here. In 87, they moved the third brake light to the lower portion of the window on the Targas and the cabriolet, or the Targas and the coupes. So if you ever see one at the bottom, you know definitively that car is a 1987. It moved back up in 88 to the top of the rear glass. Why they did that, I'm not sure. Functionally, as a taller guy, I like 87s for that reason. Let's come around to the back. I'll show you one of the other big aesthetic giveaways. Now this change happened starting in 1987. Porsche changed the rear reflector design. So if you see this reflector design, we'll zoom in on that, and then you can compare that to the design. The script, for example, when we go back over to the 86, is much larger. So you can see basically the font size is much larger. One other item worth noting is this car, someone has changed the rear taillights to the European configuration, which they're amber on the corners. US always came delivered with all red taillights. This is a nice upgrade. I think it looks nice, but again, original is all red. Moving to 88s. 88s tend to be very hard to spot because they look very similar to an 87. However, you'll note the third brake light moved back where it belongs. Or not say belongs, that's just where they put it. So that's one change for 88s. And oftentimes, one other clue you have an 88, which this one's going to throw us for a loop. We're going to talk a little bit later about wheels, but would be wheels. So because in 89, the visual change they made to an 89 is 89's got 8-inch rear forks as standard equipment. Okay, so you can see the 8-inch rear forks on this 89 Targa here. They always kept the 6-inch front forks all the way through 89 production. So a 6 is always correct for the 16-inch fitment. But while we're talking wheels, let's talk a little bit about wheels. So most people think the fork is the standard wheel. It's what you see most commonly on these cars. However, there were actually 3 choices available. I didn't get a car, I couldn't find a car that actually had them, but believe it or not, the standard wheel through 1988 was the phone dial, most commonly seen on the 928, oftentimes on the 944. That was standard equipment. And then your first option was actually 15-inch forks. And they came, believe it or not, in a 7-inch front and an 8-inch rear whenever you got a 15-inch fork. So actually, I like this setup. I like a little bit more sidewall. I like the deeper lip. Much more unusual than the more commonly fitted. Let's walk back to this 86, 6 and 7-inch forks. So 16-inch, 6 in the front, 7 in the rear. Just the 89s got an 8. However, many enthusiasts like to change up wheel design on these cars. Absolutely 100% okay. A very common upgrade. People often will move the 7 to the front and the 8 to the rear. So I think on this 85 as an example, I believe it has had that update done. You'll notice it's got 8s in the rear and 7s in the front. Oftentimes I get the question, people say, well, how do you know it's an 8 versus a 9? Because a 9 will run here as well. So we're going to zoom in on this 8-inch rear wheel, and I'll give you some indication how you would know. On a 9-inch rear wheel, they actually have the same amount of lips, so they're not any bigger. The extra inch is on the inside of the wheel, but you'll have a recessed pocket where the lug nut is. So if you're looking at wheels and saying is it an 8 or a 9 and you don't have a way of measuring it or looking at the specification on the back, you can tell by the lug pockets. So in fact, let's see. Yes, I believe we might have 9s on this car. Let's see if this is true. Yes, so here's an example of what a 9 looks like. You can see the recessed lug pockets. No specific advantage of running a 9 other than you can run a 245 tire, which is a very hard tire to find. A couple other things we're going to touch on with these cars. We're going to touch on configurations. As we know, Porsche offered 3 different possibilities. The coupe, which is the most common of the 3. They were the least expensive when they were new. They, of course, offered the Targa, which kind of splits the difference between the two. And then through the entire production run, Porsche also made the Cabriolet, which we see represented by the white 87 back here. In the market, from a desirability evaluation standpoint, the coupes generally ruled the day. From a value standpoint, the Targas kind of split the difference between that, and the Cabriolets represent the lowest. However, things are changing. Targas are picking up steam a little bit. Cabriolets, I think, still represent the best value in the market. As another point in this video, oftentimes I talk about the values of these cars. I won't be talking about specific numbers from a valuation standpoint because I don't want this video to become dated, meaning that if you watch this 2 years from now, these values may be very different. So we're really just going to focus on what makes these cars, what sort of things you want to be looking for, and we'll go from there. So one of the hotly talked about topics in today's Porsche market is color. Which colors people respond to and how that maybe affects value or desirability in the market. Of course, color is highly preferential, and color varies a lot depending on what's happening in the broader culture. So certain colors come in vogue, they come out of vogue. And in the mid-'80s, it was a pretty conservative period of time. So we didn't have some of the wild, vibrant colors offered on the mid-year cars, for example, or even some of the early SCs. So there are a few adventurous tones in the 3.2 era. I don't have all of them represented. I think we have 9 different exterior colors represented here today, but some of the more common ones. So we're going to start here. This is Grand Prix White. Grand Prix White debuted for the 3.2 Carrera starting in 1986. I think it's a great, crisp, nice color. It never goes out of fashion. It's easy to maintain. I particularly like it on a Targa. I like the relief with the black Targa bar and the black trim. Worth noting is that every 3.2 Carrera came standard with black trim. They were never optioned with bright trim. Unlike an SC, you could get bright trim, which was standard through 79, and you could option it all the way through the end of 3.2 SC production. So you'll always find black trim on a 3.2 Carrera unless someone's changed it. Another interesting color, this is an anniversary edition car, 89, in silver metallic, which of course, as we know, is a very traditional Porsche color. And this one doesn't have an exotic color, it's just simply silver metallic. So a very pure, original silver color. One of the other colors I really, really like, that we actually have 2 cars here today, which is kind of unusual, is diamond blue. This is one of the 88 commemorative edition cars. And diamond blue is a kind of a warm, almost picks up a pinky purple hue depending on lighting. Very desirable color. Luckily in the 3.2 era, we did have a lot of different blue tones that Porsche offered. I think this is one of the great ones. I also like Venetian blue, which we don't have here, is a great color, slate blue. Currently the blues of the 3.2s are probably one of the most in vogue shades. So if you have a blue 3.2, pretty desirable. Another color we have here, which is a very hard color to find, and you'll find this more commonly, believe it or not, on modern Porsche, is a color called carmine red. And carmine red is more of a brick red. It's non-metallic, just a gorgeous shade. Now, I did mention non-metallic. I want to say one thing about metallic and non-metallic in this era. These cars, the non-metallic shades are always painted from the factory in single stage, meaning they are not clear coated. The metallic cars are always 2-stage, meaning, again, that they have a clear coat. So one way to determine original paint outside of a paint meter is if you have a single-stage non-metallic car like this, and you go to polish it and your rag doesn't turn red, someone's refinished it in a 2-stage process, which is pretty common. I'm a fanatic. I like them to be original single-stage cars. And of course, we have another color which never goes out of style and never looks bad, is black. They did offer a metallic black during 3.2 production as well, but more commonly you'll see a standard black. And this car is 100% original and absolutely spectacular. Again, I just love the black Fuchs and the black trim, black exterior, black interior, so a great example. Behind us here we have another color which I just think is just amazing. This color is called Cassis Red. This color was offered just in 87 and 88. Pretty unusually seen. It's a kind of a silvery sort of pink purple hue, changes depending on the lighting. And this car draws a lot of attention wherever I take this car. People really, really enjoy seeing this car. In the background here we have another diamond blue. This is the Targa. Another one of those colors that's hard to capture depending on lighting. So it's actually nice in our video. We're going to get to see this one in full sunlight, and we saw the diamond blue coupe in the shade. Grand Prix white on this cabriolet. And of course, when people imagine a 3.2 Carrera, the car they think of is this car. It's Guards red. Porsche's had this color on the palette almost continuously since that period of time. And in the mid-'80s, this was the car. Interestingly enough, there was a period of time in recent history where the Guards red cars kind of sold maybe for a discount, or people were talking a kind of a negative tone about them because they were so common. Yet, interestingly enough, lately, a lot of people are going back to them because, again, when you imagine this car, if you transport it back in time, this is the color almost everybody thinks of. So you can never go wrong with Guards red. Again, we have black on black with the Targa, a great look. And then a color that was actually a 911 SC color starting '83 and went off the palette in '84. So another way you know this is an '84, it's quartzite, which I love. It's kind of a brown hue gray mix. Just a really warm, very nice mid-'80s color. So again, we don't have every color represented. We're missing, for example, summer yellow, which would be a great one. We're missing some of the blue tones. We don't have a black metallic as an example. They also made a color called chiffon white, which is sort of a creamy yellow white, just in '84. '85, they had kind of a reuptake. I can't recall the name right offhand, but just some great colors in this era. But if you're looking for a bright, vibrant color and it's original, unless you have a paint to sample 3.2, there were not a lot of options, but some great choices. So glad we got the opportunity to talk about color. You know, one of the other things, now that we've talked exterior color, I love to talk about is interior options. One of the best things about German manufacturers in general, but Porsche in particular, is they never lock down an exterior and an interior combination. If you've ever ordered a lot of different manufacturers, if you specify an exterior, oftentimes they mandate a certain interior color. That was never the case with Porsche, and they had a bunch of different options available during that period. So the first one on this '84 is brown, which to me is a nice warm tone. It goes very well with quartzite. So this color interior did leave the palette after '84 with the new style interior. Another color I really like, and it's interesting because I no longer like this color on modern Porsche, I think they got the tone just a little bit off, is cashmere. So this Guards red car with the cashmere interior, this is a 19,000 mile all original car, and to me this interior is spectacular. Of course it helps the condition of this particular car is just unbelievable. But I think it just gives such a nice relief to the red, gives it a nice visual pop. But the beautiful thing is you don't have to agree with me because, again, you could have gotten Guards red, believe it or not, with black. You could have gotten it with gray. You could have even gotten it with blue, whatever your choice was. Or one of my friends has one in Guards red on can-can red, which is what I call murder scene red, which is quite fabulous. Now we'll go to this Cassis car. This one has what I think is the best pairing on this exterior color. This would have a linen interior, but it has a deviated tone-on-tone match steering wheel and dash. So you'll also find these with a complete linen interior, so they'd have a linen dash. I'll show you that a little bit later. But sometimes when you get these more unusual exterior colors, it's oftentimes hard to find the right pairing of the interior, and this, in my opinion, is the best combination for Cassis red. Now, for diamond blue, this one I love, and this is a very traditional German color. This car has a navy interior. This car, we'll pull this out because that's going to drive us crazy. This is a 9,000 mile all original car, but you can see in navy blue, and just a great combination. Interestingly, we talk about blue, we're going to talk about another interesting choice, and I actually argue this is the most unusual thing I've ever seen Porsche do in this era. In fact, it doesn't really actually seem like a German thing to me. It seems maybe more an American manufacturer might have come up with in period. And this would be the commemorative edition car. And in this car, they took a navy interior, but they applied a metallic finish to it. So we can zoom in there, we can show what the commemorative edition interior looks like. And you'll notice it has a metallic sheen. You'll also notice the Ferry Porsche script in the headrests. So kind of an unusual finish. We're very blessed. This is a very nice original car. I dare to consider how you would possibly refinish these seats to get just the right finish. And that carries over, of course, to the door panels and such. Since we're talking about unusual interiors, we talked a little bit about on the Cassis car linen. Let's talk about the 89 anniversary car. This car, Porsche went all out on linen, and you can see a completely linen interior, although it does have black deviated piping on the seats. And they did get the Special Wishes 930 Turbo S style center console. This is just a gorgeous combination. I will say this is a good car post-COVID because we're used to washing our hands a lot. So you want to have clean hands when you're driving this car with the white steering wheel. So again, that covers a lot of the interiors, but not all of them. We also had a green that was available. We had red. I certainly wish I could have had everyone here, but again, it's 1990, so we don't have brand new 3.2s anymore, even though we've traveled back in time. Now we're going to talk about interiors and interior options. If you go to 2021, our current year here, we know that you can order a Porsche and the option list is nearly unlimited. In this era, there were certainly quite a few options, but it probably could fit on a single page. So we're going to talk particularly today about interior options, and I'm going to show you a couple different configurations. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is seating. So Porsche offered two basic seating types. And again, the 84 is unique. It has the old SC style interior, but 85 and later, they got this style seating, and you'll notice this is a sport seat with some much more prominent bolsters. These are generally highly desirable. You'll also notice this is the most basic configuration, which is just a four-way power. So it's manual fore and aft, and all you can do is adjust the rake of the bottom cushion via power. So again, sport seat in this car. A couple other options I'm going to point out. This car is a standard partial leather car. So what does that mean? Well, this was the free choice when you ordered this car new. So partial leather on this car, you can tell it'll just have a plastic door handle here. This is a really good indicator. It's just a partial leather car. And the only thing leather in the car is the front seat seating surfaces. So here, here, and here in the backrest. Everything else would be vinyl. So the backs of the seats, rear seats, door panels, these would be exclusively in vinyl. I'll show you here in just one moment what they call a leather beltline car is, and then I'll also show you what it looks like in a full leather car. But I want to point out a couple things that are interesting with this car option-wise. This car does have the extended hub steering wheel, which is nice for us taller people. One way you can tell is there's a little bit more clearance between the dash and the steering wheel. These do not adjust for rake or reach like a modern car. Basically, the Germans said, well, we'll put it where we want it and we hope it works for you. So you can also see the extension for the hub on the steering wheel. This extension cannot be added to a wheel that doesn't have it. You have to buy a complete wheel. But the wheel will swap if you want an extended hub, but you just have to go find one. So that is on this car. I'm going to jump to the car next to us and I'm going to show you leather beltline. So leather beltline came out predominantly from hot climates like the US, where we have California, where people wanted a more premium interior, but they were having problems with shrinking of dashes and rear deck lids due to high heat. So a leather beltline car, you can tell it has a stitched handle like this, stitched door pockets, and it means exactly what it sounds like, leather beltline, meaning everything around the belt of the car is leather. Front and rear seating surfaces all the way around the back, rear seats and door panels are leather. However, you then still have a plastic dash cap, and you would have a vinyl rear deck. To me, this is actually the sweet spot because leather does not wear well, particularly out in the sun. So if you get a 30-year-old 3.2 Carrera with its original full leather interior, finding a perfect one is very difficult. But I do have a perfect one to demonstrate what they look like when new, and if you can find one, they are worth their weight in gold. I love them. This particular car is a heavily optioned car originally, and it does have full leather. So again, you'll see the stitched door panels, but if you see that dash, it is a thing of absolute beauty. This would be a full leather car. As a general rule, if you're shopping, I would generally avoid full leather cars because they warp. This car, because it's a 17,000 mile all original car that's never sat outside, it looks remarkable. You'll notice even the rear deck is full leather on this car. But again, prior to the 3.2-liter Carrera, Porsche only offered either partial leather or full leather interior. They didn't have this beltline option. And believe it or not, because they had so many issues with warranty claims with shrinking leather, they did not allow dealers to order full leather cars for dealer inventory. They only allowed them to order by customer order because they didn't want to have so many issues with people doing warranty claims. While I got you here, I'm going to point out a couple of other unique options on these cars that it's kind of fun to talk about. We talked about seats. So again, 4-way seats were standard, 8-way were an option. So you can see this car's 8-way, meaning that it's power fore and aft. That's how this one works. But it's also heated. Porsche started offering heat starting in 1985, a pretty unusual option in 3.2s. But for those of us with a little bit of winter, I love a good heated seat. They are not variable, and starting in 89 they became variable heat, but in these era they were just on and off. You'll notice extended hub steering wheel in this car as well. And let's zoom in on that radio. That is the original radio Porsche used on these cars from 1984 until 1986. One heads up, if you're shopping for one, test to make sure all the buttons work. We no longer can source the buttons. So if, for example, your presets don't work, I've never found a source for someone who can rebuild those and make those work right. They sound absolutely lousy, but if you want a period radio, that's what you would have from 1984 until 1986. Starting in 1987, the most common radio you'll find is the Reno, which looks like this. However, this was, believe it or not, an optional radio. I believe the standard radio was what was called the Charleston, which looks identical, but I don't believe has an external amplifier. So either of those would be correct for that car. Of course, many people have replaced them over the years. Well, actually, while I have this open, let's talk about, there are different speaker options too. So all the way through 87, they became with this speaker configuration. And then they had an optional configuration starting in 88, which gives you a lot better choices. Those are a 4-inch door speaker. And they went to this style design. Someone's actually changed this grill. This is a slightly aftermarket grill, but it's the same design as the original one. So a separate 6.5-inch driver and a 1-inch tweeter here in the door. So the 88 and 89 cars do offer a little bit better choices for sound, but they're all lousy. And frankly, you drive the car for the sound coming from the back. Now we'll talk about another hotly debated topic on 3.2 Carreras, and that is, do we like spoilers or do we not? Of course, the spoiler was first introduced in 1984, and it's commonly called the Carrera spoiler for just that very creative reason. It came out for the 3.2 Carrera. The previous generation SC, late SCs, believe it or not, used the turbo tail. Early SCs used a rubberized spoiler. One spotter's guide on a 3.2 Carrera tail is it tucks underneath. The turbo tail is actually fully boxed in because it was designed to hold the intercooler. So when you see the relief cut out, and then the turbo spoiler has a different lip. The lip comes around and comes up. So the correct spoiler for this car, if you have one, is this 3.2 Carrera spoiler that you see here. And one way you can tell it's original is they are stamped underneath with Porsche and they have the crest. So if you're looking to authenticate if it's a real one, you'll notice it says Porsche underneath and it's stamped in there. So this is a real one. And let me show you how you would know if the car was delivered originally with the spoiler, because they were commonly added in period. And this, of course, would be on the option code sticker, which is under the trunk. We'll delve into this topic a little bit later in the video, but when you zoom in here, Porsche assigned option codes to all these things that we talk about. Option code for front and rear spoilers is 473. So you'll note that on the option code sticker for this car. And while we're up front, I'm going to point out something else. When you got a rear spoiler, you always got from Porsche this front spoiler here. Okay, it's kind of a rubberized lip spoiler. Now, very commonly, people like this look. People very commonly will add these to cars that didn't originally come with them. If you read Porsche's official literature, they call that a no-no from an aerodynamic standpoint. You should always run either front and rear or neither. You certainly would never want to run the rear without the front. But again, very, very common. In fact, one of our cars here has this configuration. I like it, I'm okay with it, but the official answer is it's a no-no. Let's go back and look at the underside of this lid. One of the other ways you can oftentimes tell that a spoiler has been added to a car is they usually don't pay attention to the fine details. So for example, you would be able to look, okay, it is official rear spoiler, but sometimes when you go look, underneath they have this mounting bracket and brace. Almost always when I find an additional one, it's got the wrong hardware and it's missing this brace, and you'll see kind of, it not cut in a particularly nice fashion. So one of my spotters, if I can tell it's an original rear spoiler, is just that. And then of course, right next door, we can see what it looks like with the traditional flat lid, right? So this never goes in or out of style, and it's just highly preferential. A lot of times people will tell me I want a car either with a spoiler or without a spoiler. If you're buying the car and you want to add one, no problem. It's simple, 4 bolts. Take the original lids, wrap it up tightly, put it up in your attic, and add a flat lid or add a spoiler. Only thing I would tell you is if you're going to add a rear spoiler, add the front as well. So that's our topic on spoilers. Okay, I'm going to enter the fray. I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about the most controversial topic in 3.2 Carrera world, 915 or G50. And I have very strong opinions about this, and they are opinions, so you can take it for what it's worth. The basic sentiment generally is that the G50 is a radical improvement over the outgoing 915. So again, 86 here was the final year of the 915. This is exclusively a Porsche internally built transmission they used from 1972 until 1986. And starting in 87, they outsourced the transmission to Getrag. It is called the G50. So a lot of people think that this is an improvement. I think there's some definite pros and cons, and I'm going to talk about what those changes are. So in essence, this 915, which we used for a period of almost 15 years, easiest way to distinguish it is simply look at the shift knob. Now, a shift knob on a 915 car, reverse is back and to the right. If you look at a G50 car, it's up and to the left. So why did Porsche go to this transmission change? There was a couple reasons. One, they felt that they wanted to have a hydraulic clutch to reduce clutch effort. They were getting some feedback that clutch was somewhat heavier than they wanted. And they were also concerned as the cars gained more power that they were reaching potentially the limits of what the customer would tolerate from a clutch effort. So if they were going to put a larger clutch in a 915, they felt they were going to cross the threshold of what the average physician or attorney of the period was willing to drive. And so this is one of the reasons they went to the G50. So let's talk pros and cons. We'll start with the 915. To me, the pro of a 915 car, the single biggest one, is I like the fact it's a Porsche-developed transmission. It was built internally. It's 100% Porsche designed, and it's the transmission kind of that we're used to. It's very mechanical. It's very visceral. You kind of come in harmony with the car, if you will. It kind of rewards you driving well and getting your rev match just right. I also like the fact that the 915 cars weigh slightly less, about 150 pounds difference between a G50 and a 915 car. Mostly made up for the fact that these cars were 200 horsepower. They became 217 in 1987, but the power to weight stayed very, very similar. The other difference is the 915 cars have a lighter clutch and flywheel, so to me they seem to spin up a little bit more quickly. I appreciate that about them, but they do have higher clutch effort. They have higher shift effort. And one of the other big things, and this is where I think a lot of the controversy lies, is that 915s, as they wear over time, they sort of degrade in shift quality in a pretty linear fashion. G50s tend to not wear in such a fashion. So one of my issues with it is people will oftentimes drive a worn out 150,000 mile, 30-year-old 915 gearbox and pronounce that 915s are bad. And what I always say to them is, no, actually, the 915 you drove was bad. When you drove a good 915, it is a beautiful thing. So this car, 19,000 original mile car, you go drive this car, you will have no doubt as to why Porsche used this gearbox for 15 years. You'll have no doubt that it appeared in the 73 Carrera RS. It's an epically great transmission. So, this is not a zero-sum game, however, so that doesn't make a G50 bad. In fact, the G50s are wonderful. The market prizes G50s. You'll pay a premium for very similar cars. You'll pay probably a $5,000 to $8,000 premium for the G50 model. The major advantage of this one, lower clutch effort, and they tend to be more precise in their shifting. The joke I always say is I would be more willing to lend my mother-in-law one of my G50 equipped cars than one of my 915 cars, because they take a little bit less mechanical empathy and a little less kind of synergy with the car. So that part's nice. And again, as they wear, if you were to go drive a typical, say, 150,000 mile G50 car and a typical 150,000 mile 915 car, what you'll find is that the G50 car, again, they don't degrade in the same way over time. And so the G50 will generally shift better. Now, it may have some issues with it, but generally there'll be catastrophic failure, and one day it just won't shift. Where the 915 will get worse and worse over time, and it just will become intolerable. Let's talk about some of the other things that differentiate them. One big thing I don't like about G50 cars is they're noisy. So if you ever drive a G50 car, and as you're releasing the clutch coming out of first gear and it has this sort of whirring noise and you think something's wrong with the transmission, nope, business as usual. They're just kind of a noisy gearbox. 915s, if they're good and correct, I should clarify, are quieter in my opinion. And they have some gear howl at low speeds in fifth on G50 cars. And again, the heavier flywheel, they're a more relaxing car to drive, but they just seem a little bit more lethargic in my view. If you're going to repair these transmissions, 915s cost about half as much, again, as repairing a G50, because most specialty independent Porsche shops will tackle, for example, replacing synchronizers, dog teeth, things like that on a 915, whereas most shops will not work on a G50. They'll send that out to one of the couple nationwide known rebuilders on these cars, so that costs more money. So neither good nor bad. What I always tell people is buy the best car and being less focused on how it was delivered new, because they aren't new cars. I jokingly said we're back in 1990. Well, folks, we're not. It's 2021. And so the difference between the two cars is more important than the difference between how they were built 30 plus years ago. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So meaning I'd much rather have a Rockstar 86 than a so-so 87 being so fixated just on the gearbox. Okay, let's talk special editions. During this era, Porsche did make a couple of exclusive edition cars, and there's going to be a couple cars here that sadly you won't see in the video. So I want to touch on those, so lest you think I don't know they exist in the world. The one I would love to have here that we don't have here is the Club Sport, which Porsche had in 88 and 89 here in the US. It was an utter sales flop. A whopping, I think, 21 cars were sold here in the US, hence me not having one here today. Spectacular car, basically a lightweight version of a 3.2 Carrera. The other really cool model that we don't have here is a Turbo Look, or an M491, which denotes the option code. And the Turbo Look car, first debuted in 1984, was made all the way through 89. Basically takes the body shell, suspension, and brakes of a turbo with the normally aspirated 3.2-liter engine. Very rare, very desirable car. More common in 84 and 85 because, of course, Porsche reintroduced the 930 Turbo here in the US starting in 1986. And a lot of people really didn't understand what's the point of the Turbo Look if I can get a turbo. I'm one of those people. I tend to be more of a normally aspirated guy. I really prize the Turbo Look cars. And in fact, the car I really prize is what's called the M470, which would be a Turbo Look spoiler delete. Really rare car. But I am going to feature two cars here that are special editions that commonly get mixed up, and I want to dispel some of the mixed notions about what they are. So this car is the 88, what they call the commemorative edition car. They were always finished in diamond blue metallic. They had 15-inch, 7 and 8-inch Fuchs with body-colored centers. And we already covered this in the interior part, but they do have the very unique navy interior with the special metallic finish and the Porsche signatures in the seat. These were offered in coupes, Targas, and cabriolets. So again, this is the 88 commemorative edition car. And sometimes these terms get bantered around and people confuse them, but it's nice to have them side by side with what's called the 89 anniversary car. You can distinguish these cars for a couple reasons. The anniversary cars are either in silver metallic or black metallic, so distinctly different colorway, different palette. They also got 16-inch Fuchs, which were also finished in silver metallic. And again, we know since it's an 89, it would have 8-inch rear wheels. They have the unique linen interior with the black piping. They have the 930 Special Wishes center console. Now we'll zoom in. This car has the plaque that's on the dash, which tells you about the anniversary edition package. And believe it or not, I do have the plaque for this 88. It's just tucked away for safekeeping because they're nearly unobtainium. Both of these cars are great. Some of it boils down to what your preference is. It seems as though on the market, there are more 89 anniversary cars generally available than the 88 commemorative or sometimes shortened to the CE edition cars. Most of it will just boil down, frankly, to your preference on colors. Both are great cars, 88 and 89. And again, these are the special editions of the 911 of the era. Okay, only after the 915 G50 topic is another hotly contested topic, and that is mileage. Particularly here in the US, we are obsessed with mileage. We think mileage is the single most important thing when we're looking for a car. And you'll notice today we have a lot of very, very low mileage cars, but we also have some cars that are drivers, cars that have been driven. And so when I talk to people all the time about these cars, they always focus first and foremost on what the mileage on the car is. And what I always tell people is always suspect the mileage not to be true. Now that doesn't mean that owners of 3.2 Carreras as a whole are dishonest people. What it means is that there's a whole litany of reasons that the odometers on these things might not be correct. So, a couple things. You'll notice this car shows that it's got 162,000 miles, which actually, if you start thinking about this car is 36 years old. So while we think that's high mileage, that's really less than 5,000 miles a year on average. So this has still been someone's, secondary or tertiary car. That's an honest number. So I'm okay when I see 162. I want to see good documentation of what work's been done on it. The joke I always tell is that every SC or 3.2 has 74,000 miles in the market. Well, that simply can't be true. There should be a bell curve. And so when I see 162, or I celebrate when I see 224, because I know nobody rolled it back to 224. But even for less nefarious reasons, let's talk about why the odometer might not be right. The number one reason is the mechanical odometers on these cars very commonly break. They have little plastic gears in them. The most common reason they break is they get reset while the car is in motion. Those gears come together and they strip the little teeth off and they stop working. Easily repaired. If this happens on your car, send it out to one of the many well-known speedometer repair shops. A couple $100, you'll get it back. There's no reason to run around with a broken odometer. One of the best ways you can tell a car has a broken odometer is if you look in the photo and it shows 000 on the trip odometer. They may have just reset it for the photos, or there's a high probability that odometer is not turning. So what you want to see is you want to see mileage gaining over time, right? So how would you prove a car is the miles that it is? Well, the best way is documentation, but more than anything, it's about condition. Because one of the reasons that we want to pay extra for a, quote, low mileage car is that it should be a bellwether of the condition of the car. So when I see a car and it shows it's got 40,000 miles, but it has the wear of 200,000 miles, well then really what am I buying? One, I'm probably not being honest with what I really think the miles are, but I'm not getting the extra that I'm paying for, which is the condition. So we're going to walk over to the next car, and this 86, this is a 19,000 mile car. And when you look at this car, everything about this car, you will fully understand that it's a 19,000 mile car when you look at all the things like the seat, right? You can tell that just doesn't have 200,000 miles of someone's rear end sitting in that seat. The shift knob, the carpets, the pedals. Wear, for example, it's got an original Sigla windshield. You can just look at the windshield. You can see how much road wear you would have, I've gotten into really low mileage cars and you look at the windshield and it looks like it's got 200,000 miles of road wear, right? So again, I want the condition of the car to mirror the odometer. And again, I'm not opposed to a higher mileage car. I think for many people, a high mileage car is really the way to go. But let's talk about that documentation. What do we want to see when we look at a car that's fully documented? Well, what I want to see is an unbroken chain from the day it was delivered to current. That's the ideal, right? So when I see that, I know that that's correct. So I'm going to open up the front trunk on this 86 here, because this car, this is a 17,000 mile car. We've talked about this a little bit earlier in the video. And this car has spectacular documentation. And this level of documentation gives me a level of comfort that the miles are correct. I also, for example, can look at this car and I can look at the paint on the leading surface of the hood as an example. This is an original paint car. I feel pretty comfortable this is an accurate representation of its mileage, right? But in here, this is one of my cars, so I'm a little bit compulsive about stuff. And so I keep a box for all my cars. And here I've got, how I would have documentation. So as an example, I've got the original sales brochure. I've got the original ordering paperwork when the car was ordered when it was new. So I know exactly how it was optioned, who had it, where it's been. And I have all its service from its original pre-delivery inspection to its very first warranty claim work at the dealership and all the way through, all organized in a 3-ring binder. So I feel very comfortable this is the accurate mileage. When I'm going to go inspect a car, oftentimes they hand me a box of paperwork. I take the time, believe it or not, to go through it and put it in order, and I want to see that the cars gain mileage over time and there isn't a big gap. There isn't a period of time where the odometer stayed the same mileage for 5 or 6 years. I actually traveled a few years ago down to Texas to look at a 993. And when I opened the garage, it was a black car as well, had significant rock damage on the hood, and it was a claimed 10,000 mile car. And when I asked the owner, I said, well, I noticed in the service records, it hasn't added mileage for 10 years on the service records. And his answer to me was, well, I didn't drive it much in those 10 years. So I passed on that car. So again, one of the hot topics for me, mileage. These are very durable cars. They are heirloom quality cars. You could easily drive one of these cars 300, 400, 500,000 miles, not without maintenance, but they will do it. So don't be shy of a high mileage car, but you want to know what you're paying for and what you're really getting. Okay, let's talk trunk, or frunk in Porsche speak, for front trunk. What comes in them, how they differ, and what things you're going to be looking for. So we're going to start with this all original 86. And with this car, I'm going to point out a couple things that are unique. They offered 2 different kind of interior trunk finishes on 3.2 Carreras. As an option, you had the nice velour. This was an option in the car. You had to pay extra to get it. I'll show you in the next car the standard fitment, which is the Perlon. One thing you'll also notice in this car, because again, it's heavily optioned, it has intensive washing, which is this tank up there. So headlight washers, intensive washing for the windscreen. I did pull out all the accessories that would have been come in the front, in the original glove box. I figured this is a good time to do that. So if you're trying to decide, does my car have all the information it would have come with? So they would have come in this maroon folio here. The interior color changed by year. There isn't really a standard for that, but they came in this sort of folio. They would have come with a warranty and maintenance book like so. We'll come back to that in a moment. An owner's manual, a manual for the Blaupunkt radio, even with a cassette showing you how to use it. A rare item, talking about the 7-year corrosion limited warranty. These cars are fully galvanized. Rust is generally not an issue unless they live somewhere undesirable. We even have a little brochure for the factory floor mats. That style, where the Porsche script, that is the correct style floor mat that Porsche made in this era. The current floor mats have a slightly different font and are not technically correct. What keys would they have come with? When they were originally delivered, they got 2 black master keys with the lights. This is the alarm key if you have a factory alarm, hard to find, and this is the wheel lock key. You'll notice these little leather bags. In period, and there were several different styles Porsche used, but this would be a style that would have been typical in period and correct for the car. And then they also came with this little valet key, and then these are the key codes. So again, pretty rare to find a car that has all this. This one has it. You'll also have a guide that tells you where the Porsche dealers are. And on your partial and full leather cars, you got a little hang tag explaining you how to care for the leather. So if you're a nerd like me, you have all this stuff present and accounted for your car. But let's come back to this warranty book, because this is important. When these cars are delivered new, they got a warranty book, which generally, if you would show you where it was delivered, might have the salesman's card here. This was Continental Porsche Audi, no longer in business in Portland, Oregon. It'll generally show you the date of original delivery and the stamp for the delivering dealer. One thing I always call out is oftentimes if early in period, if they had a speedometer replacement, you'll see it noted here. So sometimes these cars I see with low miles, I'll find out the speedometer is replaced at some point, it's noted. So I always want to look there to see if it was noted. And then here we have our option code sticker. So the top line is the VIN of the car. The particular configuration, a 911 340 is a coupe. L700 is the color, that's black. VD is the interior option code, and these are hard to decipher, but basically that means black full leather on a coupe. And so, for example, black partial leather coupe would be the designation LT. Porsche never published those, so those things are just kind of in my head, but you won't find a definitive list somewhere. And then down below are your option code numbers. And you can find there's some good tools online that will decode those. CO2 indicates it was a U.S. delivery, non-California. So a California car would be CO3. German delivery car, as an example, would be COO. So you can look all those up. And then these are your various option codes. One caveat I will give you for option codes is that Porsche used the same code over many years, and sometimes that code changed meaning. So sometimes you'll use a decoder, and you'll type in an option code, for example, this 8632, and it'll pull up an option code that was used on a 993. So then someone will say to me, oh, well, it says my car was delivered with 18-inch wheels. Well, we know that's not true. It just means it was the code was for different years. So you got to be a little bit careful when you read those. You'll also find a second version of the option code sticker under the hood, which is here. It should match what's in your book. This is also hotly debated. These stickers were applied actually at the dealer during pre-delivery inspection, so oftentimes they're crooked. So a lot of times they're also missing. If it's missing, usually you want to inspect for potential damage, but oftentimes they just fell off over time, or people thought they were unsightly and removed them, but ideally they should be there. One other thing that's hotly debated that I'm going to make a definitive statement on this is there was a period of time from late 1984 through mid-1985 where Porsche went a little bit rogue on option code stickers. And in fact, we're going to walk over in a little bit with this black 85, and I'm going to see if this is one of those cars. Meaning that for a period of time, they actually did not include option code stickers on the sticker. They'll just show the delivery state. So if you find you have a late 84 build or an early 85 build, and your option code sticker simply says CO2 and no option codes, don't assume the car didn't come with any options. They just didn't give you codes. The other thing that's very weird in that period is that typically if you have color code 999, that indicates paint to sample. However, in that period of time, there were many cars that came through with a 999 option code that were not truly paint to sample. I've had people argue with me about this, but the way you know this is if the car is finished in a color that was available per the brochure, but it's given a 999 code, it was not a paint to sample car. So you'll find this very commonly on sites like Bring a Trailer. Someone will say they have a paint to sample car, and yet the color code shows an available color. Well, then it wasn't paint to sample. So I'll show you when we go to the next trunk when we get there. But so let's jump to this 88 Targa here. We'll talk about trunk accessories that they were delivered with. So in period, every 3.2 Carrera came with this style plastic compressor case, with one exception. The exception would be if your car was originally a factory tourist delivery car. It came with an orange compressor, which was the same compressor that was delivered in Europe. And the reason for that is this compressor came from Volkswagen Porsche of America, the distributor, as was installed after the port. So if you picked your car up at the factory, they had to provide you one. A couple clues that you have an original tourist delivery card is that you would have option code at 900 on your option code sticker. You would generally also have an orange compressor. You would have a first aid kit and a warning triangle, because those are required in Europe. Toolkits. Us Porsche nerds love toolkits. Essentially all 3.2s came with the same toolkit. The only difference would be the coupe came with a sunroof tool. This is a Targa kit. They would have come with 5 open-ended wrenches. You can see that fuse box there. It's Pudens is the label on it. This is what the fuse pack usually goes missing, but again, I collect pristine cars. This is the original style fan belt. This is how the original fan belt would be labeled. They came with a screwdriver with 3 different blades. Screwdrivers are the most commonly missing items, along with the 10mm wrench, for obvious reasons. They're things we use often. But this is what a complete toolkit would look like. And again, Porsche was very civilized. They thought, oh, if you have to change a tire, we'll give you a nice tire tote. So this is a plastic bag for you to place your removed wheel in if you have to remove from the car. Because, of course, it will not fit in the front trunk. So if you have to change a tire on the side of the road, you would be putting it inside the car. And then they didn't want you to dirty up your hands because maybe you have a linen steering wheel, and they gave you a nice set of OFX gloves to use. So again, you'll notice this car has the standard carpet, which is the Perlon. I've had people question, say, well, this is an expensive car. Why'd they use such a cheap carpet? I'm not really sure. Maybe it's a final budget decision, but this is the basic Perlon. We're going to move to the next car, and I've removed the trunk carpet. When you inspect one of these cars, the trunk carpet pulls out very easily, so don't just lift the carpet up, remove it so you can inspect closely. So, a couple things I'm going to point out here. You'll find your color code tag here on all 3.2 Carreras. This is the placement for the color code tag. Earlier, Porsches had a code in the door, but this is where every one of them should be there. So again, back to that late 84, 85 question. If you see a color that was available and it shows on the brochure for 84 or 85, even if it lists 999, it's not paint to sample. A couple other things we want to look for when we have the trunk open on these cars. Here is your VIN. Let's zoom in on this VIN because there's something really interesting happening here with this VIN that gets a lot of people worried. You'll notice on this VIN, when we zoom in, you'll find a ZZZ right here. And people say, well, that doesn't match the VIN of the car. Just for fun, let's zoom in on this option code, and you'll notice in the VIN up here in the option code, there is not a ZZZ. So someone says, wait a minute, my car, it doesn't match. Well, I'll tell you why that is. When Porsche originally built and stamped the tubs, they had not yet designated what country the car was going to go to, so they got the ZZZ as a filler, and the US had rules for how that 17-digit VIN had to lay out. So once the car was then destined to the US, it got a VIN which fit US specification. So for example, the rest of world cars have a ZZZ in the VIN all the way through because they had different regulations for VIN numbering systems. But in the US, those ZZZ got filled in with a sequence of numbers. So that's why your tub VIN will have a slightly different number than your VIN tags, which you will find on the A-pillar. You will find here by the windscreen, up in the corner here. Probably hard to see. You'll have one here in the B-pillar, right? And if you're lucky enough to have an 87 to 88 or 87 to 89, Porsche actually VIN tagged every panel with a sticker, which is one way you can determine that they are original. Now, lest you think this is because Porsche was being exceedingly generous, they actually did this because in 1986, the US passed a law called the FMVSS, and it basically said that for commonly stolen items, the manufacturers either had to provide an alarm system free of charge for the buyer, or they had to label each individual part. So if the car were stolen, parted out, they could track where it came from. So Porsche didn't want to give away an alarm for free, so as a result, we got these VIN tags on this era car 87 to 89 and continued on very early 964s. So here's an example, and this is one way that you can verify, for example, this hood is the original hood to this car. A couple other things I'm going to point out. Fun stuff. You have a date stamp on your spare tire, so 26th week of 1987. It's about right in the era for this particular car. You can see the style hold down that Porsche used. And tucked into this corner is the jack. The same style jack was used throughout 3.2-liter production. It's got a little hold down in here. Other things commonly missing in front trunks on these cars is Porsche has a fuse panel here. Here's the fuse box. They have a little fuse diagram here on the fuse panel. It's commonly missing or broken. One of the things I always want to inspect when I look in front trunks in these cars, I'm looking for evidence of accident damage. I'm looking for, back in the 80s, everyone decided to add an Ungo box to these cars. They put big speakers and amplifiers, so I don't like aftermarket wiring. So I'm always looking for what modifications have been made under hood. I also often get the question about paint finish. People say, well, look at the paint here on the fender, it's gorgeous, and in here, and it's harder to tell on this car because of its lighter color, but it's not finished out, right? And people say, oh, has there been an accident? Because I see this kind of welding and I see this. This is actually glue from the carpet when they were put down. But when Porsche painted these cars new, they just gave a light dusting of color in the front trunk, and it varied by whoever was building the car that day. So you'll see some have more paint than others, but it's absolutely correct to have kind of this level of finish. If you ever open a trunk and it's perfectly shiny, as good as the front fender, it's been refinished. So I think that's a pretty good summary of looking in the front trunk. Lots of fun stuff to find in there. And of course, we could not talk about 3.2 Carreras because we name them after that without talking about the business end, which of course is our 3.2-liter engine. So again, same engine shared through the entire life of this car. The only real difference between them is they did gain 17 horsepower starting in 1987 here in the US. Some factoid person will tell me they're different in Europe, and you're right, there are 231 horsepower in Europe, which is primarily driven by the fact they did not have a catalytic converter. So we're going to start here. This is our 85. It's the highest mileage car in our group, which kudos to the owner for driving this car. And this shows a more typical engine bay, things that, what am I looking for? Again, this isn't a full PPI video. I'll probably do one of those as a follow-up. But this will just give you an idea as an average enthusiast, you're looking at engine bay, some things worth noting. So a couple things that I notice about this right away is I can tell this car has been refinished, and I can tell that pretty easily because it's missing the foil stickers that generally would be present on this rear panel. And I also notice that, interestingly enough, it's got the wrong hardware for the rear latch. It's actually Porsche hardware, it's just probably sourced from somewhere else in the car. Those are not the right fasteners for there. But overall, a very tidy engine bay, given a 160,000 mile car that I know a good friend of mine drives and enjoys. Get a lot of questions about the fans on these cars. A lot of people say, oh, I want it to look nicer. There was a period of time where people painted them various colors. You can sort of do what you want, but originally they came from the factory in just sort of a unfinished raw state, and then they had Cosmoline applied to them, so they kind of pick up this yellowy hue, and of course they're moving a ton of air, so they pick up a lot of dirt and grime over time. And if they've ever lived somewhere where corrosion's an issue, you'll see some corrosion and stuff forming on the fan. Because I noticed it on this car, we'll talk a little bit about AC on these cars. AC compressor, original style. This is the same style compressor Porsche used all the way through production. But you'll notice a little sticker here that this car was converted to R134A. So I get this question all the time. So let's just make this a real quick summary. If having ice-cold air conditioning like your modern GMC Suburban is important to you, you are looking at the wrong car. In Germany, our climate is very similar to Seattle. It's pretty temperate, and they were drivers. And so they originally were not designed to have AC. AC was really put in to appease the US market. It didn't work great when they were new, and it doesn't work better 35 years later. So I'm just going to go on record. If you have them working as designed, everything working up to specification, I always tell people, if you're moving and it's below, say, 90 degrees and humidity is not too high, it's tolerable. If you try to leave it out in a hot parking lot all day at the mall and you think you're going to get in there and be comfortable in 10 minutes, you're simply not going to be. There are many aftermarket choices. I won't delve into those, but if you're dealing with just stock and original, it's not the case. This car was converted to R134, very, very common. They, of course, originally came with R12. I'm a fan of R12. It's a more efficient refrigerant, but very expensive to get because it was outlawed here for use at the end of 1999. Now moving over here, here's this 19,000 mile car, and you can just see, for example, the correct foil stickers. You can see what the correct fasteners would be here for the rear engine lid. And you can just see, kind of how the plating and all that, originally looks on these cars. You'll see with the sound pad almost always fails. You want to look under there and see if it's failing or sagging. But that's what it should look like. They originally had a little nut on the center of the fan pulley that's almost always missing. This one has it. One of the things that you want to make sure you do on a 3.2 Carrera, I'm thinking about it because it's particularly hot here today in Seattle, is fuel lines. They have an old style fuel line which should be replaced as proactive maintenance, because what you absolutely do not want on any car is a fuel leak. Fuel and hot engine parts are a explosive combination, we'll call it. We'll use a bad dad pun there, but so you want to be careful about that. And really what I'm looking for topside is just something that calls my attention. Again, this isn't a full PPI video, but I'm looking for evidence of accident damage. This is how, for example, the original quarters look. Some people think that, oh my gosh, it must have been repaired, but that's actually how the factory did those, that fill there. And you can actually just barely see the little spot welds here as they joined that panel. That's how they were finished from the factory. If you're looking under the engine lid, again, you can tell this is a factory original spoiler car, because again, how this is supported. You'll have a EPA sticker here, which will have the date of manufacture here, so this will say 86. Interesting thing with Porsche, they actually reproduced that sticker, but only one that says 89. They figure it's the same, but it's a pet peeve of mine. So again, engine bay, on a 3.2, great motors, almost no foibles. Valve guides can be an issue as they start to wear, but it seems to be intermittent, meaning that not every car seems to be affected. So some people have this idea that all of them are going to need valve guides before 100,000 miles. I've actually not found that to be true. I've certainly seen them, but basically they need valve guides if you have excessive oil consumption. The problem with excessive oil consumption is it's generally not enough for them to smoke, and most people have no idea actually how to check their oil in this car, and they don't generally drive it enough that they see. They might change it every year or two, and they've only put 1,000 miles on it, so they actually won't see that they've actually burned any oil. So it's a really hard thing to measure. If you actually have it using enough oil it's smoking, well then you've got a whole other answer. So again, great cars. Not a full PPI. We'll do a separate video where we talk about some of the known issues on these cars, but that's what a correct engine bay on a 3.2 Carrera should look like.